Hola Miguel, no te oigo.
Hola, buenos días.
Ay, ahora sí. Ay, Miguel,
¿Buenos días?
sí, ahora me oyes.
Sí, te oigo, te oigo.
Vale. Bueno, tenemos un participante, Francisco, que no había confirmado, está. Así que bueno, seremos tres. Que no le voy a dar paso hasta que no sea la hora.
Sí, vale. A ver que voy buscando yo mis propios referentes. Francesco Mantino, ¿no?
Sí,
Ujú. Este señor está en uno de los proyectos Interreg, tengo
sí.
entendido.
Interreg no son Horizon.
Horizon. Ah, vale, vale.
Esto se está grabando, ¿eh?
Sí, sí, no, no, claro, no lo sé. Pero bueno,
Sí, sí,
no obstante,
para que lo
pregunto.
tengas en cuenta por si acaso.
Sí,
Eh, vale, pues si no, si te parece, hacemos como siempre, nos silenciamos.
sí,
Y cuando llegue la hora ya empiezo a dar paso a la gente.
de acuerdo.
¿Cómo estás de tu brazo?
Así, así, ¿eh?
Bueno.
Me tengo que llevar una especie de
Oh,
cabestrillo, en fin. Ya va mejorando, pero me va a tomar días. ¿Eh? Entonces ya
bueno,
he tenido que cancelar cosas, en fin, un rollo.
bueno. Bueno, Miguel, ahora hablamos, ¿vale?
Vale, muy bien.
Sara.
Hasta ahora.
Hola, Miguel.
Hola,
Si te parece, empiezo. Empiezo a
sí,
dar paso. Creo que solo está Francesco, pero bueno.
así.
Uy, a ver, porque he tenido un problema y antes se me ha salido y ahora no me aparecen participantes.
Hola, no.
Voy a ver si por casualidad he recibido algún correo.
Ujú.
Está ya, le admito, ¿eh? Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, Francesco. Is this your first meeting?
Yes, it's the first meeting. Unfortunately, I was unable to participate to the first one where you all have met just to present. But
Don't worry. And welcome.
Yes.
thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation and for this opportunity. I found very interesting the project that you are implementing. It's very ambitious, but we need ambitions in this period, you know?
Even at the risk of failure.
Yeah. It depends on how you face this the project, obviously.
Well, one way or another, we're going to take something useful and
Yeah,
that can be spread, and maybe others can take the lead from what we uh, will have done and make it better. So let's
yeah,
say, let's go for it and see what comes out of it all.
yeah, yeah.
So um, we can still wait for some other participants. Good morning, Maribel.
Hi,
And,
how are you?
and well, good afternoon, Kate. Good afternoon, Harry.
Hello.
Hello. So just a couple of minutes, and if no one else gets connected, we'll start. I will have to apologize if I make some strange movements, but I got pain in my shoulder, and it's really painful. So I barely can use my right hand. So let's see if I can touch the right keys. If not, anything
Yeah.
is possible. Sorry.
Too much time in front of your PC? No,
Oh no, no.
no.
I mean, I spent a long time uh, sitting and typing my computer, but the problem came from the gym. I was
Ah,
so I did something wrong, and it you know how it works at the beginning. You notice nothing, and one day after, or 1 or 2 days, it
yeah,
starts, just is something. Well, you feel you feel uneasy, or it's a sensation, and then it becomes a very strong pain.
yeah,
You can't sleep. You got to go run to the doctor to get your pills to calm it. And yeah, it's finally you get the diagnosis.
Mm.
Bursitis, tendinitis. But anyway, well, so I think we can start then for our group for good. Thanks for coming, everybody, again, and I will make, as I usually do, a smaller recapitulation of what we have done, and particularly for you, Francesco, and well, Arias has been in some of our meetings. I think Maribel as well. We are trying to. Oh, Silke is also with us. So good afternoon, Silke, if you can hear us, and be welcome to group 4. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, there you are. So thanks for coming as well, Silke. So, well, I will just explain a little bit what we are doing in these thematic group meetings. Each thematic group corresponds to one of the 6 actions defined by a beautiful report made by the European Network for Rural Development some 2 or 3 years ago. And that report defined the actions that should be taken in order to set up rural proofing at any scale. And we have gone through these different actions through our thematic groups. So we are discussing about different points on them with a view to defining, if only roughly, the critical aspects of each action to be taken into account for us to deliver a methodology for assessing assessment methods. May seem a little bit crazy, but at least that's what our purpose with it. So at the end of our whole project, we will have to be able to have identified this methodology on the basis of the critical aspects we have identified for a good rural proofing in each action to be undertaken. I don't know if I made me clear enough, but today we are focusing specifically on establishing guidelines and templates and strong evidence for rural proofing. And I don't think we will be in a condition to define into the details what should be in a template, or what should be the contents of a good guidelines document for policymakers and civil servants. But at least we can make an approach to the way to organize a little bit, or because things may be different depending on whether we choose for a method or another. But one of the problems that drew my attention, and I don't know if also yours, is that I found in the ENRD report that sort of 2 alternatives. And I asked Anna to include it in the Miro whiteboard. So if you have it before your eyes, it will be nice and useful, so that you can make comments as we work, as we proceed. And the first thing that we found in this report is that we can have this template and guidelines produced by the lead rural proofing body, idealistically, or ideally, depending on the presidency or a strong ministry with full horizontal powers to influence on other departments. So in any case, a lead rural proofing body equipped with a dedicated staff and budget and empowered to apply its rural proofing task on all departments. So the two elements that should be produced, as we said, by that team or body is a template for policymakers to follow that should be clear, straightforward, as simpler as possible, and robust. That means that should be made in such a way that wouldn't become just a senseless, a pointless exercise of ticking boxes by policymakers and fulfilling a sort of ritual that has really no purpose for them. And the other part of it is the guidelines. The guidelines should guide, of course, those who have to work on the template, giving steps, first of all, how to proceed throughout the rural proofing process, the outcomes and impacts that are sought, keeping in mind the purpose for this all, to avoid the boring tick box exercise, and of course giving directions, giving patterns, giving all what is useful in order to ensure that stakeholders' participation is incorporated, and that everyone knows the role and responsibility that has to undertake throughout it. As a premise, as a must for this all, we got to have a diversity of, or be mindful of the diversity of rural areas. So whenever we design a template, we should be taking into account that mountain areas aren't exactly the same, or the impacts on rural areas of certain policies could be different from islands or from flat rural territories. And also it has to be, because of this probably, and because of many other gentle reasons, flexible enough to be adapted to at regional or local levels as well. So that's a little bit what we have. And we have that other associated to this model. I suggested a couple of questions that we could talk about. You can add any one, you can change the perspective, you can challenge these questions at all. But as I tell you, we will try to steer our conversation through these questions. So we have, as I said, this pattern, and the ER&D document suggested that it could be possible to have an alternative model for organizing these rural proofing tasks. Is the idea that probably under a non-mandatory, but this is just theoretically, probably under a non-mandatory, a more voluntary approach, any department initiating a policy proposal will undertake by itself the task of deciding, first of all, whether to apply rural proofing or not. And if the conclusion is that after some screening, a light touch screening, not too in-depth, come to the conclusion that rural proofing is not necessary, in such case, the report states that it should be explained. So rationale for that decision should be given, and also recorded, the shape of a document, depicting who is taking the decision and on which basis, on what basis. And the other solution would be that, of course, after that screening, the conclusion is that rural proofing is necessary, and then you will come to the detailed process for rural proofing. which that's not explained at the report, but probably would have to come back to the resources of that lead rural proofing body at state or regional level, or it could have some departmental structure to carry on rural proofing. So in any way, that poses questions. The report says that maybe that would be a good model at an initial phase of establishing rural proofing in public administrations, maybe under a voluntary basis, I don't know. But in any case, that would be good to start with a given department initiating policy proposals, and then expand the whole model to the rest of the public administration. So in any case, for this second alternative, it will be indispensable to guarantee transparency on, first of all, the decision of rural proofing or not, the reasons and who takes the decision. And of course, if you have to rural proof it anyway, to be transparent on the different impacts that are defined when considering rural proofing as a necessity for ensuring success. So and of course you should also give account of your sources and what are the data, the evidence, how strong it is, in order to decide whether to rural proof or not, and if yes, on what basis and with on what grounds you are going to rural proof the potential impacts of your initiative. So that's a little bit the main the debate, as I would like to suggest, as I said. And the first question is for before deciding a little bit on these methods, there's always the same question: mandatory or optional? What would be the best way, at least, to introduce mandatory from the very beginning, or optional? What do you think? Do you know any specific experience that will cast a light on what is the main advantages or disadvantages of mandatory rural proofing from the very beginning, or not? Does anyone make any comment or take the floor?
May I start?
Yes, please, Francesco.
No, but before answering your question, I expected different questions in this group.
Okay.
Because the group is, I was very happy when when I saw that I was in this group, because it's dealing with template and guidelines. So it is concerned on the more concrete discussion about rural proofing. Rural proofing is something vague in my vision in the literature, and probably one of the main point is try to understand what kind of rural proofing we want to do. This is my my initial question, because you can have from the operational point of view very general exercise like tick box exercise, or you can have more sophisticated and more quantitative analysis of the effects of your policy. So you have to decide what is your main objective what is the field that you want to address, because otherwise it's impossible to understand what implications there are on the other steps of the analysis. However, in my view, coming to your question, in my view, the rural proofing methodology should be mandatory, because this doesn't mean that every department of the public administration should use rural proofing, but there must be at least one structure or one task in a specific structure that deals with rural proofing. There must be some main responsible of rural proofing in your administration that is able to involve other branches of the administration and other branches of policies in this exercise of rural proofing. Must be one responsible that is able to deal with rural proofing in terms of competence, in terms of tasks, in terms of personnel devoted to this task. Because otherwise, if it remains optional, nobody does rural proofing at all. But I repeat, this is a question related to the architecture, to the governance of the rural proofing, not to the rural proofing methodology. And I would like to discuss much more in detail on this topic. Because this topic has strong implication on the other question you are raising for the group. I don't know if I was clear.
Very clear to me, at least, and I don't know. Probably all the rest of you will agree with it. Just feel free to take the floor if you wish. If not, I would say that we have discussed in the other groups about the organizational aspects a little bit. So this is redundant. So you are right. Maybe we should be getting straight right to the point on defining a template. For instance, defining a template entails defining the critical aspects of a given piece of legislation or policy designed on rural territories. And for that purpose, I wonder who should be responsible for it. The main rural proofing body, or each department according to its goals by defining an initiative, or a group of experts from the top rural proofing unit. Betty, you want to say something? Betty Ann.
Yes, I did. Sorry, this is not my group, so my intent was to be quiet. But my questions, or maybe my response, is a bit similar, a bit to Franco, in that the mandatory or voluntary discussion, I think, has to be contextualized, because we have seen where mandatory didn't yield good results and voluntary doesn't yield good results. So I don't think it's enough to say, should it be mandatory or voluntary? It's driven by the context you have. So for example, if you're new to rural proofing and if you don't have a lot of things in place to do it, and it has to be kind of, I don't want to say forced, but it has to have some power behind it, then you can argue mandatory would help. But if you already have a framework in place that will allow for it to move forward, mandatory may not be needed, but other items could be needed to reinforce it. So I think that's a different piece. As for the guidelines themselves, I think there's something to be thought about the body that you're talking about. The authority to act is relevant. The authority to reach outside this framework and drive rule proofing makes a difference. The guidelines will differ or should differ whether you're at the national, regional, or local level. And you have to factor in the time it takes around policies, because that will determine how detailed the document or the guidelines should be. So I think those aspects need to be considered. If you're at maybe the local level, maybe you have more time, so then you can go into a bit more detail, but do you have the evidence, etc. And finally, who should be it? It's very important. I always, channel this idea of the rule proofer. So as you're thinking about designing a checklist, the key people who should be involved in designing this should be the person who would be tasked with rule proofing. And so it becomes very important that the rule proofer, civil servant, mixed with external whatever is involved, because otherwise you don't want them to receive something that does not fit their work product and the way that they work. So then it does become a checklist. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. And anyone else want to add something?
I already wrote some notes on the Miro. My feeling is that maybe a potential approach could be that a mandatory framework with different levels of obligation depending on the type of policy being assessed. That's my general feeling, and with a centralized guidance in order to unify all the tools and templates for ensuring coherence, at least at the very beginning. When it is running from long time ago, then we can be more flexible, but at the beginning, I think it's better to be a kind of mandatory framework with centralized guidance and with a central authority as well.
Yeah, thank you. That would be probably a good compromise between all the aspects, mandatory or not, centralized or not, that we have been considering, and of course, than what we can read at the ENRD report. So yes, let's move forward then on the lines suggested by Francesco, and let's think about these main assets for rule proofing. According to what Betty, Anne, and Maribel suggested, a sort of cooperation or coordination between the different levels of responsibility should be established in order to define the guidelines and the template. Do you think that this work should be organized exclusively in-house, or consultation or participation of stakeholders should be taken at that very early stage of the definition of a rule proofing scheme? Of course, experts as well should be incorporated. What do you think? Maybe it's too early for stakeholders at that stage, but not for experts?
Yeah, I think so. First experts, then the second phase, other stakeholders.
and then stakeholders.
In my view, there is no differences between the different kind of actors that should be involved. I believe that in a process of analysis of the possible impact of some policies, all relevant stakeholders should be considered. That means that could be expert, could be uh, um, internal personnel of the public administration, but could be also local authorities or representative of local authorities, because they have the idea, although not documented by that data very often, but they have the idea of in the past, what the policies have produced in their territories. So they can be very important witnesses of the reaction or the possible reaction to the mm, policy design. I think that there is no clear hierarchy between the different stakeholders, but every type of stakeholders should be considered in different steps or in the process of negotiation.
Okay, so probably we should try to think of a sort of a cascade of different steps from the very first conception of the issue, consultation with experts, with local authorities, then with stakeholders, and then try to issue a sort of draft template that should in any case take into account the identification of different ruralities or rural realities that might have a different degree of vulnerability of in front of any legislative initiative. I don't know, but in any case, there is a work for geographers, for technical staff working on territorial impact assessment, which is a more general discipline within which rural proofing is a sort of specialty. That should be brought about in order to define that first template and guidelines, I guess, if I have well understood.
Yeah, in reality, there is no speciality in rural proofing, not at least until now, but probably there is a speciality in the knowledge of possible impacts of the different territories. For example, just to be clear, the representative of small municipalities can be very important, or the representative of mountain municipalities that have a specific representation or a specific association, at least in my country, and also in other European country, could be very relevant, because usually this part of the territory is left behind in the allocation criteria for policies. Just to be general in the discussion, but every policy has its own specificities.
And if I may, just on the point of stakeholders, I agree that I think everyone should be at the table. And I think you should think about designing it. It should be an iterative, incremental process. So you start with everyone who would be, whether they're experts, wherever they come from, because it's just important to learn from each other what the different perspectives are. So it's good for civil servants to hear what others are thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And then you also have to design it knowing that it is a test pilot. You're not going to get the guidelines. You should not expect to get the guidelines right in the first try. You should develop it, then test it, then build it with flexibility to adapt and test it incrementally in different spaces. But the idea that you will get the checklist correct, you should get rid of that idea, because until the person who's rule proofing uses it and then gives you that, what you build it with feedback to say, did this work? Why didn't it work? It was too complex here. It was too XYZ. I didn't have the time. I think it has to be designed incrementally, and then you have to put the time towards it so people aren't like, getting upset that it's not working. I don't know how better way to frame it, but you have to build it with the idea that we might not get it right for 6 months to X number, but we are taking feedback, we're adapting, you bring the group back together, we learn until you get there.
I think that what you said, Betty Ann, it reflects very well the experience in Britain. For instance, DEFRA launched its rural proofing activity in 2004, if I remember well. And I would say, from what I've been reading, and mostly from their website, that it took more than 10, 15 years to reach a sort of fairly fine tuning of the whole system of template plus guidelines to feel comfortable, I would say.
And that's the same in Finland. It's the same in a number of countries, even in Canada. It took them a while to get to something that they think works. And when it worked, it might work in this context for this region, but it might not work in the region to the left. So I think managing expectations in that way and thinking about it as a learn by doing piece is important to set from the outset, because if you take it to a place like Italy or a country like Italy, it might be more complex because all the municipalities are so different. So we need to understand a bit the culture and the context that would make this guideline work here versus over here.
So probably one of the main aspects that we should identify in order to, try to come to assessment of this guidelines and template definition would be what you named as an incremental process. That involves gathering knowledge through different means in a very flexible, adaptable ways, and in order to get after testing and adapting to the best fitted set of guidelines and checklist for any rural proofing that would like to be successful as to last after a couple administrations of government. I wonder as well about the concept of territorial impact, because Francesco sees no apparent difference or speciality in it. Serafin Pazos, however, said in a previous meeting, I think it was in thematic group 3, that properly speaking, rural proofing isn't but a kind of speciality or I don't know, a special focus of the general process of territorial impact assessment. I don't know if the rest of you say it as such or not. Who do you think is right, Francesco or Serafin?
No,
Sorry,
no. I have to be clear. I didn't say that they are two different things. I said that in order to understand the impact of policies, you can use different methods, from the simply qualitative methods to the quantitative methods. Okay? Uh, but in any case, you are always considering the possible impact of the policies that you're designing or are you studying. Okay, so conceptually there is no difference, but the difference is on the method that you want to use, the method you think that could be used given the resources, given the data, given the knowledge that you have at disposal. In my view, what is important is not discussing about if rural proofing is an impact assessment or not. It's important to understand what kind of question you have to raise in the template, because this drive your rural proofing. And the questions are very relevant in the template. For example, the first question, in my view, should be what territorial location could be produced by the proposal program. And this is a question very important that you can face in a qualitative or a quantitative way. And in this case, you can have different policies that have a place-based approach or horizontal approach that need to be understood. And to be understood, you need to have clear what kind of implementation rules have the policies. You cannot make a rural proofing of ideas or general strategies. You have to make a rural proofing of policies that have implementing rules very clear. The second question is, what is the allocation of the current programs, similar to the programs that you want to introduce? Because learning from the past is important. And in order to do this, you have to have at disposal a good and efficient monitoring system, because if we have no monitoring system of the current policies, you cannot infer on the possible allocation. And the third question is, what kind of relations there could be between the policies that you want to introduce and the current policies that you have in the territory. This is a question of coherence, because there can be conflicts, synergies, or complementarities between the different policies. So in my view, these three questions should be in the template, because if you have no such question, you cannot make evident what you want to reach with rural proofing.
Okay, thanks, Francesco. Does anyone want to add anything?
Well, for me, rural proofing maybe should focus on rural specific impacts, while CIA can address broader regional issues, maybe.
Yeah.
Isn't it also a question about whether, are you making a distinction between whether the policy or program is new versus ongoing? So maybe the initial question, if it's a new initiative strategy that's coming online or about to come online, then the question is, how do you see then you ask the question, how do you see this affecting rural? Like what that's one of your first initial questions. If it's a new policy versus an ongoing policy that you are now assessing. I mean, I make that distinction because if it's an ongoing policy, then as Franco said and others, you learn from what happened before. So you have some evidence and you're using that to then respond to or to inform how you move, how you go further. But if it's a new strategy that's coming down the pike, I mean, that is just new, could be environmental, it could be anything, then it becomes, this is the idea of a strategy. The question is, how do you see this affecting the territory? And then do you have the evidence of what that potential impact could be to then inform and make a better decision if that is the way you want to go. So I do think the distinction needs to be made early about whether it's an ongoing versus a new strategy. And one could argue you go in two different directions if you're trying to, make a diagram. I don't know if that's clear or if you agree with that, but I think that might be important as well.
Yeah, well, rural proofing has to have a purpose that fits with the initial vision defined at the early stages of launching rural proofing, and basically is guaranteeing the well-being of people, no matter where they live, by guaranteeing. I will give you the floor, Betty Ann.
Sorry.
By guaranteeing. That's good. That's very good. Their access, the access of the right to access services. That was at least the final set by the ENRD report. Tell us, Betty Ann.
No, I believe someone's hand was up before. I don't want to. So is someone else's hand up? I think. I was just going to say that I'm always cautious about managing expectations about rural proofing, right? You have to have a clear objective. And rural proofing, I don't think that you can put that on rural proofing. That rural proofing is meant to help you think about the policy, but it can't get you there to say it's going to make sure you get equal access, or that's a little bit too much. It's a process to help you evaluate the impact, the potential impacts on the policy. Stop there, but it cannot guarantee, because you cannot force a policymaker. Rural proofing cannot force a policymaker to act on that information. And that's very important, because when you say rural proofing fails, you have to think about what about it fails. And a policymaker can get that information and still decide that they're going to go left instead of right. And that's not on rural proofing. So I just want to say that's why I reacted that way, because I've seen people say that and then say, oh, rural proofing didn't work. But rural proofing has no authority to force a decision maker to act in a certain way.
Very challenging, Betty Ann. At least to action one of establishing a vision, but it's inevitable that expectations will go far beyond just setting a method to analyze potential impacts and stop.
No, I agree with that.
Particularly if you take into it stakeholders, rural stakeholders.
And that's why we have to start with, that's why we have to say that you can't put that on rural proofing, because it's not a policy. Rural proofing is not a policy. It is just another tool in the toolbox to help decision makers make better decisions. But, as I learned, even when I was writing my own paper, my director said to me, so what if we get all the information and we learn that this policy is going to negatively affect a rural area, but it's going to positively impact urban, where maybe 80% of the people live, and we decide to go that way? And he actually wrote on my paper, did rural proofing fail? And I said, well, no, it didn't, because did you have that information and decide to go in a different way? So that's why I think that's the love and hate of rural proofing, because there's an assumption that because you have given them all the information, they're going to do it and then everything will be okay. And when we did the research, we found that sometimes they had information, but they didn't. And that's sometimes lost in the discussion. Sorry to take over, but I just want to make that point clear.
Okay, Are wants to talk, and I don't know if Francesco.
Silke,
I
Silke.
was, yeah, I was earlier.
Silke,
Oh,
Silke
yeah, you
was.
were earlier. Silke, sorry, Silke.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Betty and also Francesco. So I think it's totally important to first know who is the target group of the rural proofing. So is it the policymakers, which are have to decide on a policy or a strategy or a regional development plan or anything, or funds to be spent or so? Because are they the target group of the rural proofing, or is it the population to understand maybe better, or is it maybe for, as you said, on the experts, so that the experts at university or in working on local economic development, that they understand what are the specificities of rural development of rural areas or mountain areas or border areas or so. So I think this is important to understand. And then it also, I agree that it's only a tool and a method. So it's not a development plan in itself, even if now the process of rural proofing can be really dynamic and involve a lot of stakeholders. But I would also say not to put the expectations too high that the rural proofing process will present or will develop activities in itself, which will help to improve the development in these areas. So it's only a filter or a lens which you put on certain analysis to have the rural specificities in mind. And the third point I wanted to say, I think it's important to build up capacity. So even when you start the process and start developing templates and evidence, it should be incremental, because you might start with zero capacity, so in-house in the public sector. So maybe first you need some experts to bring in this capacity or to build up capacity. But later, when you have developed capacity, you can have specific people working in-house in the government or in the public sector on rural proofing, because they then know about it and they might have already specific evidence or data or information on rural points, and that's what is important. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Silke. Are, maybe?
Are.
Oh, okay.
I think all important things are said. I would to add only to Betty, and maybe that the rural proofing is not policy. Sometimes I'm discussing in Estonian context also that the rural proofing and also in general regulatory impact assessment as a toolbox is a part of regulatory policy, and of course as a tool. In Estonian case, the mandatory is that we have every ministry, every department has to clear statement. There is regional impact including rural or coastal areas or not. And if there is a different impact to the urban and rural areas, then different departments and ministries have to analyze the system and so on. But the problems are in capacity, and different ministries are using different data and different methods and so on. And we have to clarify the system in general, and we are trying to borrow good ideas from other countries now in Estonia. But yeah, in general, this good governance and good regulatory policy context, that rural proofing is very important tool, and I think we have to vaadates it to guarantee some legal and economic, etc. Benefits for rural areas, because usually urban areas are in the focus, because the most of voters are in cities and so on. Just in brief, so.
Thank you, Ari. Please, Francesco.
Yeah, I will point out two issues in my view that are important. When we discuss about rural areas, we assume implicitly in our discussion very often that rural areas receive less money than the other areas, or doesn't receive any policy at all. This is completely wrong. And so the concept of rebalance the flow of policies between rural area and other area must be reconsidered. The second issue is that we assume that we know which kind of policies are addressing rural areas. But this is completely wrong again, because we don't know, because very often we have no specific monitoring system telling us what kind of policies are interesting in rural areas. So when we use rural proofing, it's important that we consider not only the problem of policy redistribution, but also the problem of relation that the new policies has with the previous policies. I think that rural proofing should consider very carefully the problem of coherence between the different policies, not only the problem of distribution of money between urban and rural areas, because this is too simplistic, I would say.
Thank you, Francesco. That's a good point as well, because we've been discussing in other groups a little bit on these questions around well, are we always considering rural areas as needy territories that must be subsidized and so on? And I think it goes right in the opposite direction, or at least in trying to create a new view of rural areas as territories with a sort of characteristics that react differently than, for instance, urban areas to same policies and laws. And we need to better legislate in order to give positive effects in as many possible different areas as we can. So rural areas are spaces for opportunity and for things as well. They have problems, but they have also opportunities. So it's the way we can get the utmost from legislation to steer the best results anywhere. Good. About it, no one wants to add anything on this issue. I would like to suggest you to put an eye on statistics, on evidence, because we've been talking of quantitative data, but also qualitative data. But we know that this knowledge is scattered in many different units, bodies, places. How to put this together for the service of rural proofing? I don't see it very easy. First of all, one of the many problems is probably that we have statistics. I mean, statistics are like a lens you need to adapt the graduation depending on what you want to see. They are discriminatory. So probably standard statistics are made for a given purpose, and we need to develop specific statistics for specific purposes that we were not detecting by, let's say, the standard way of legislating. But in any case, this is one of the many problems. But we have a dispersed knowledge probably, and we need to re-elaborate it to adapt to rural proofing. So we need to give first evidence before rural proofing, or it is just the opposite. We feel that we need to rural proof a given initiative, and we need then to gather knowledge or to create new knowledge around the need to anticipate to the potential impacts of an initiative. What do you think? How would it be in your country, for instance, to get to that optimal result of getting the evidence needed for successful rural proofing?
I think it's if you allow me, I think the evidence is the critical part of rural proofing. So that's one. The type of evidence varies. So in OECD speak, we talk about rural proofing intelligence, and we describe 3 different types of evidence that's needed to support rural proofing. The question I would put back to you goes back to the question of who's the audience, because that matters in terms of the evidence, right? So if you're rural proofing, when we looked at rural proofing, we looked at it at a level of who needs the evidence. It's not the departments of rural or the departments of agriculture, etc. It's agencies or departments that are not normally thinking about rural, right? So agencies that don't think rural, if you say you looked a little bit at the UK speak, so they'll say agencies that don't think rural. So then that means that they don't understand the state of rural. So we talk about the state of rural evidence. Then we talk about the second layer of evidence. There could be what is the potential impact of the policy or the strategy that they're trying to introduce on rural areas, which is different. It's linked to the state of rural being, this is what's going on in rural housing, environmental, etc. What is the potential impact on rural, negative or positive, if this goes forward? That's quantitative. And the third layer is what type of evidence there is that working with rural will help you achieve that result. So if it's an environmental policy, what is the evidence out there that could help you work with rural, so it doesn't have to have a negative impact, but it can have a positive impact? Now I'm just sharing with you how the OECD frames the discussion, but that third layer of evidence is that quantitative or qualitative, because normally there's not enough evidence. But everything I just said is where your stakeholders come into play. So institutions, experts, all of the folks that are there, this evidence is probably out there in different ways. So it's about, when you bring folks to the table, helping to gather and package the evidence in a way that it could be shared at different points. So that's just one way. There are others that we try to suggest or promote to countries when we're talking about rural proofing intelligence. And that's what we call it.
If I can add something to what Betty Ann said, I agree completely with her suggestions. I would make some example at the local level, because we are working a project, in a European project called, where we are trying to implement rural proofing at the local level. So one of the first problem was how to combine different kind of sources of data in order to understand what is happening in the specific rural areas, and what could be the reaction of rural area to a specific policies. So is a bricolage working, because we are trying to combine data available at national level, at regional level, and at the local level. And we discovered that there are plenty of data at local level that have never been used. So this bricolage work help us to understand the complexity of combining data for specific purposes. Just an example, we are examining policies for the water management, and we have to collect data on public expenditure on water management at the national, regional, and local level. So it is the objectives that forces us to collect specific data for this evaluation. But looking at the national or regional level, I think that it's important to have a specific structure that is able to look for this data and combine the different data, have knowledge of the different sources, because if the combination, the use of data can be spontaneous, should be planned by a specific program of work. So the presence of a structure at the national or regional level could help also to combine this data and to create new database that are useful for rural proofing.
Yeah, and if I may, yes, it must be planified, but in my opinion, there are also some other creative or alternative ways of getting data from local spaces. And in that sense, there are two European big projects that are running now under the Communities Goal, European funded by the European communities. The name are Rustic, and the other one is Granular. And they are, in fact, trying to collect more granularity in data using alternative ways of gathering data. And I think we have to wait till these two consortiums are getting outputs, and we will see, because you are absolutely right. And we do not expect only quantitative data, but also qualitative data. And if we take into account the rural stakeholders, probably the ways to extract that data must be radically different as well. So we will see what those consortium are trying to find. I'm participating in Granular. I'm not directly involved in the data work package, but I'm very interested in what the results are from those groups, because for sure the rural needs some other data and some other ways to get that data.
And if I may just add to her point, once you've gathered the data, which is already in of itself a lot of work, how you translate that data for a non-data person becomes very critical. Because again, I'm always going to emphasize the rural proofer, because the person who has to actually use the data to then make an informed decision has to understand it. So it has to be kind of prepared and packaged in a way where they can quickly look at it and understand, okay, it's a problem, it's X, it's Y, it's Z, it's M. And I think getting all the data, but not spending the energy on translating it for the reader also works against rural proofing.
Yeah, you are right. And even to translate it, to the measure of the small municipality in Galicia, we live in the northwest of Spain. In Galicia, we have lots of nano municipalities with less than 500 inhabitants. There is the measure, and that's all. No other civil servant. So, and he or she needs to understand easily, fast, what the experts are translating. And it's not easy because they are not used to do that.
That's a very difficult process, and that's where your relationships that are existing with institutions, with I don't know, academic, whatever, it can be helpful. I mean, in my case, when I was a civil servant, that was the role we played for the US government, where we went in and basically took all the data for the federal government and developed a portal that was kind of developed in the language of very small municipalities so that they could go in and look and understand poverty, all the issues that were happening in their territory to help them make better decisions. And that was an undertaking that our ministry paid for because we understood that there was a gap between data being available and then the local mayor understanding the data. And so that's an important step.
Yeah, that's transparency. It's not giving all the data. It's giving the data in a way that you can understand the data.
Yes, exactly.
Which is very important because then you will have to interact with these local authorities or local stakeholders in order to appraise the impact of what finally is going to be a taken decision. This law, this policy, that measure. Any more questions around it or comments? I found very interesting that rural proofing intelligence, and I think that probably a good deal of what we have been hearing today on how to combine quantitative and qualitative data in order to make the proper reading and a proper interpretation of the information, and then to translate it into a language comprehensible for the public. It's essential, and it's very difficult to assess. To me, I wouldn't tell, but in some way we got to try to find out that there is something in a good rural proofing system that gives us evidence that the information is being processed in a proper way in order to be accurate in our final conclusions on potential impacts. Well, I don't know if there's any other question or aspect that we could bring about to have a more thorough idea on the role of template guidelines, processing information and building evidence.
No, I have a question for you, for your work of coordination. What is the commitment that you have with the region, with the Spanish region, to provide a methodology, a concrete methodology for rural proofing, and then to test it in the future?
The purpose for this project is to deliver a sort of methodology to try to assess the quality of rural proofing at any level, regional, national, in this country or in another country. So it won't be very, let's say, perfect outcome, I guess, but at least we will make a first approach in order to give guidance to those who want to set up rural proofing in their region or country. So it would be a good tool to orientate a little bit what should be done in what way in order to ensure that your rural proofing system would be fit for your needs and goals.
And does this guideline include also a methodology of rural proofing? Not a methodology in sense in the governance sense, but in the operational sense. How to evaluate whatever policies that could have an effect on rural areas.
We will try to do it in the next phases of this project.
Okay.
So now we're just getting in contact, sharing knowledge, and trying to identify what are the most critical questions to be addressed in order to assess rural proofing systems.
Okay.
Then we will see to what point we get. It's a little bit early to have an accurate idea. We will see.
So there will be some point of this process where you could submit some proposal also to the group to be discussed.
Yes, we will draft
Okay.
a text based on what we have been going through in these meetings, and we'll try to come to consensus or something that could be the basis for that methodology for assessing rural proofing.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. If there's nothing to add, we have a limit of 1 hour, 30 minutes, but it's not necessary to make use of it all. Your time is very valuable. And I thank you again very much, your contributions, your participation. Hoping we will meet all face to face in Cuenca in May. So take care of yourselves and good luck. See you soon.
Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Grazie. Thank you.